in James chapter 3, and we're going to go through verses 1 and 12. But as I was thinking through this text, I was drawn to a story actually out of Matthew 15, where Jesus is talking to some religious leaders. And of course, the religious leaders and teachers of the law, they're always a little upset with him because, you know, it seems like Jesus discounts a lot of the ceremonial laws. Of course, in chapter 15 of Matthew, where the story I'm talking about is out of, they're upset because it seems like maybe Jesus' disciples aren't washing their hands, right, ceremonially, as they go and eat, before they eat. Now, the text doesn't say that his disciples didn't wash their hands, just that the teachers of the law didn't see them wash their hands. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But they get upset with Jesus and say, why don't your disciples wash their hands? And Jesus, you know, he looks at them and he says, Isaiah was right about you. You know, Isaiah knew what he was talking about. He said, these people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, right? It's all about the outward appearance. Their heart is far from him. And that, of course, this makes the religious leaders upset because Jesus in verse 10 says, listen and understand, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but only what comes out of the mouth. That's what defiles them. Now, the religious leaders get kind of upset with that idea because, of course, you know, what goes into the mouth defiles you. They're all about ceremonial rules and laws. And so Jesus saying this kind of goes against how they see God or how they live out their faith. And the disciples come to Jesus and they say, you know, those religious leaders, they got upset with you whenever they heard that. And Jesus in Matthew chapter 15, verse 17 says this. He says, don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth comes from the heart, and these are what defile them, right? So Jesus has this idea that the words that we speak represent the feelings, our true heart, right? And so that's why it's so easy to become double-minded in what we say, because there's when we speak, it represents something deep inside, right? Now James has a similar idea when he goes into James chapter 3 and talks about the tongue. Of course, James doesn't use the word mouth or speech. He uses the idea of the tongue, but it's the same idea. The tongue, the mouth, it's about your words and the words you speak. Those words represent what's really deep inside. And they can have positive consequences, of course, right? We can encourage one another. We can build one another up. But they can also have negative consequences. We tear people down, right, with our words. And so James goes into the tongue. But there's something about pure religion in how we speak, right? Now, if you follow James when he defines pure religion, he says it's taking care of widows and orphans. We've seen how pure religion actually doesn't show favoritism. We've seen how pure religion will clothe the naked and feed the hungry, right? Pure religion is very much about our actions, but it's also about the words that we speak, right? I want you to remember back, James chapter 1, verse 26. James says this. He says, those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless, right? That's really interesting because what James is claiming is that you can have these actions, feeding widows, orphans, not showing favoritism, clothing those who are naked, feeding those who are hungry. But even if you have those actions, if you don't rein in your tongue, if you don't do something about the words that you speak, well, that's not pure religion either. In fact, James would say that religion is worthless. Who wants to be part of a worthless religion, right? Like, I don't want to be part of that. I want a part of genuine religion. I want a part of a religion that God the Father honors, God the Father accepts. And the religion that God the Father accepts is keeping a rein on your tongue and showing love to those around you. So chapter 3, James goes into the tongue. And it's really going to be about how not just the individual might speak and represent Christ, but also how the teacher represents Christ. And so I'm going to have 3 points. My first point tonight is going to be that there are severe consequences regarding what we say. There are severe consequences regarding what we say. Now, if you look at James chapter 3, you should notice that, first of all, the category James has in mind is teachers, right? Look at verse 1 with me. He says, not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who's never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check, right? So the category James has in mind is teachers, and he begins by saying, not many of you should want to be teachers. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I did not read this text before I began teaching in the church, right? I should have read this text before I started teaching in the church, but I was in my early 20s, and, reading was boring at that time, right? I just wanted to be up in front of people. And so when I read this text now, and I'm standing in front of you teaching, I think, you thank God for mercy, because I've said some terrible things. I've taught some bad truths, right? And so praise God for mercy and for grace. And but not many of you, that's what he says, not many of you should want to become teachers. There's, especially in the first century, second century, like there was something about teachers. They were honored by others, right? And who doesn't want to be in a place of honor, right? Standing up on the stage, everybody staring at you. Like, who doesn't want to have that place of honor? But James says that's not the way you're supposed to go about it. In fact, that's the way that the religious leaders during Jesus' time went about it. See, Jesus talks about those religious leaders in Matthew chapter 23. And listen to what he says about them and how they act. He says this, he says, everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the places of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and to be called rabbi by others. See, there's a sense of, if I could just teach, then I'll have a place of pride. People will look up to me, right? But James is saying, man, you should really think about that. Not everybody should just desire to be teachers. And you have to question why, but James gives us a pretty good explanation as to why. He says, not many of you should want to be teachers, brothers and sisters, because, right? Listen to the because. He says, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. So, being a teacher means that well, first of all, we just have just the number of words that we get out as teachers, right? Just the number of words means we have more opportunities to make mistakes, right? That's one thing. But sometimes I think, well, Paul talks about it. He says some want to teach Christ out of selfish ambition and vain conceit. Maybe you're motivated to teach out of that, selfish ambition and vain conceit. But it's so easy for teachers to use their platform in the church to be a soapbox to just spread their own agenda. See, can you guys remember a teacher that influenced you so well? Like maybe as you grew up, what teacher it was that really kind of influenced you? Teachers have so much power over their students, right? They shape their worldview. They shape how they think about God, about the world. I mean, of course, all these are worldview ideas, but a teacher forms all of those things. And a teacher can help somebody understand God in a real way, or they can be like the Pharisees who, work so hard to bring people, but once they've converted them, they make them twice the children of hell as they are, right? So teachers can lead people in positive directions or in negative directions, and we have to be careful. Not many of you should want to be teachers, because teachers are going to be judged more strictly on that day, right? Now, phew, that's not you guys, right? You don't have to worry about that, right? And besides that, like if God hasn't called you to teach, maybe he's just called you to sit there in the pews and not say anything. Great. Now you don't have to worry about it, right? But I think this text has something to say to you, regardless if you're a teacher, because Jesus stands up, and his great commission is, all authority on heaven and earth has been given to me. Therefore, go into the world and preach the gospel, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even till the end of the age. Now, let me just ask you a question. Do you think Jesus meant that commission for you? Was it a selective commission? right? Or is something that everybody is called to go out and do, right? Is it only for men? I mean, after all, women can't teach, right? Well, wait a second. Aren't they also included in that commission to go and preach and to teach? Isn't every Christian included in that commission? And if every Christian is included in that commission, then you are a teacher too. Now, you may not teach inside of the church, but you represent Christ in the world around you. Now, it could be the way that you speak, right? Be careful, because you who preach about Jesus are going to be judged first. And you're representing Christ. It could be the way that you speak. It could be the actions of your life. Heck, I was thinking about Bill this week, and it could be the t-shirt that you're wearing, right? I mean, everybody needs to catch up with Jesus, right? And he's got the ketchup logo on his shirt, right? That's my favorite shirt of yours, by the way, Bill. But when we say things, act a certain way, even when we wear the clothes that represent Christ, we are the tongue. We are preaching Christ to a world. And boy, that's a huge responsibility, isn't it? Religion that God the Father accepts is to keep a tight rein on your tongue. If you can't do that, then maybe your religion is worthless. I think this is important because, I was talking to somebody about Christians, and they're saying, I could become a Christian, but gosh, those people are just so judgmental all the time. And I think, there's probably a lot that could be said to him about that statement. But I wonder what would happen if Christians showed the mercy that they've been shown instead of the judgment that they want to put out on the world. Like, that would be a positive thing, right? See, not many of you should want to be teachers. Teachers are going to be judged more strictly than anyone else, but it's too late, man. Christ has commissioned you as well. But there's hope, because verse 2 says this. It says, we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. You guys relate to that? We all stumble in many ways? Yeah, I can relate to that. Like, I probably said the wrong thing a few times today. I'll probably say the wrong thing a few more times tonight. And so, I praise God for his mercy. It's not about perfection. And James isn't even trying to get to persuade people not to become teachers. What he's asking you is to consider your words carefully, because you represent Christ to the world. That doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but the person who's able to keep their tongue in check will keep their whole body in check. Now, personally, I think James is talking here about the leader of the church. And he's using the same term for body as Paul would use, right? You ever notice how one person in a church has such a large impact on all the people? One small person has a large impact on all the people in the church. And if they preach Christ, great. But if they use the pulpit as a soapbox, if they approach Scripture by saying, what do I want to teach today? Then all you're doing is leading people in the wrong direction. And so I think there's something to be said here for both the individual and for the pastor or the teachers in the churches, the elders in the churches. You have such a large responsibility. You're going to be judged more strictly than anyone else. I just couldn't imagine, showing up to a class not being prepared or preaching something that I wasn't sure about. I'm going to have to stand before God. So, there's severe consequences regarding what we say. The pastor who uses the pulpit as a soapbox is leading the church in a wrong direction. The person who is out there preaching a gospel that doesn't accurately represent Christ is leading a world the wrong direction. We should be people who really consider and keep a tight rein on our tongue. My second point is that the tongue is a small part that controls our lives, leading to maturity or destruction, right? The tongue is just a small part which controls the life and can lead to maturity or destruction, one or the other. Now, what James does is he uses this idea of small and large, right? Listen to what he says in verse 3. We put bits into the mouth of horses to make them obey us. we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships, for example. Although they are so large and they are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants them to go. Right? Now, if you don't understand the metaphor, the idea is a small piece can lead a large body. Right? For instance, the horse, who's ever ridden horses? Right? I rode them as a kid, tried it as an adult, wasn't as good at it. But, you put the bit in the mouth, and then the person who's got the reins controls that horse, and you can take it to the right, to the left, straight. You can even make that horse back up. They're uncomfortable with it, but they can back up. So the person that controls the bit, it can lead that horse to places of safety, or they can lead that horse to dangerous places. Or maybe a ship, right? I mean, you've got this ship. It's a large ship, and it's controlled by, a small rudder, large and small. And the person, the pilot of that ship, who's changing the direction of that rudder, can lead that ship to safe waters, or he can lead that ship into dangerous waters. So in regards to teachers, which is what I think James is primarily talking about, you have one teacher that's directing a large group of people. And if that teacher doesn't consider carefully what they say, then they can lead that church to danger, or they can lead it to safety. I think one thing that we should consider is just our own culture. Something James may not have even considered in his own culture is that as people living in the modern world, we actually get to choose who we like to pour into us, right? So many Christians are influenced by YouTube videos today, right? They are so influenced by the media. You guys have more choice than any time in history. You get to choose the news networks you listen to, the shows you want to watch. You get to choose the preachers that you allow to pour into your life. And you have to consider, why are you trusting some of these people with the rudder or the bit? And we were talking in the Bible study Tuesday, and one of the things that came up was Christians within media, right? Our shows really representing Christ anymore. There's never been a time in history where there are more Christian shows that you can watch. You just have to be intentional to go find them. But it's far easier to sit back and complain that they're not on CBS, right? I think that's interesting. But you choose who's leading the horse. You choose who's steering the ship. That was different. James didn't really have that. I mean, you were starving for teachers in the first place, right? You were hoping an apostle would show up in your town. But we live in a far different world. I guess my point is that these things, they can lead you in positive directions, the people that you follow, or they can lead you in negative directions. Which person are you following? I want to follow Christ. And so the leaders, the teachers, the type of media that I look at, if they don't represent Christ, why am I following it? There's something to be said there too, but don't forget that God has commissioned you as well to go into the world. And now you have to ask, when I'm influencing those people around me, am I influencing them in positive directions or negative directions? James goes on to say likewise, right? So in the same way that a horse is led by its bit, or a ship is led by its rudder, he says, likewise, in verse 5, likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, and it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. See, that's kind of like the tongue. Just a small spark can light the large forest. James is continuing this large, small idea. He says, the tongue is also a fire. Not like a fire, it is a fire, right? A world of evil among parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and itself is set on fire by hell. Right? I think teachers can have the power to encourage, or they can lead to destruction. Right? Like that's just true. you in your world, you can go out and you can represent Christ in a way that builds people's faith, or you can go out in the world and use your tongue in a way that destroys people's faith. Which one are you doing? So, you know what's interesting about this word that James uses for hell? It's the only time in the outside of the gospel that this particular word is used for hell. Jesus uses it a lot. It's Gehenna, and it's not a figurative place. It's a real place, right? There's a valley of Gehenna, and the New Testament translates that valley, the term, into hell, and it's a real place. It was a place where pagan nations would sacrifice their children. They would burn them in fires. They had bronze calves, right? They were shaped like cows, and they were hollow in the inside, and they would place their babies inside the belly, and they would light a fire underneath. It was a place of idolatry. But it is also a place of punishment, because when God punished, he punished that place specific. When Babylon came in and took over Jerusalem, the bodies were taken out and they were thrown into Gehenna. So when you think of what James is saying about the tongue being a fire that has the power to destroy, and itself being caught on fire by hell, don't think of Dante's hell. Think of Gehenna, a place of idolatry, a place of judgment. And those who are following bad leaders, the ones that might tell you exactly what your ears want to hear, they're being led into idolatry and judgment. You might just wonder where your tongue is leading other people. Are you leading them towards Christ or away from Christ? It's such a small part of the body, isn't it? Like the bit is a small part for the horse, the rudder is a small part for the ship, the spark is a small part for the forest fire, and the tongue is such a small part of your body. And it can lead to great destruction. But it can also build up and encourage. What you have to do is be willing to rein in your tongue and make sure you're not using it to drive people away from Christ. I want to read from Proverbs chapter 16, verse 27. And it talks about the tongue being a fire. It says, the scoundrel plots evil, and on their lips is like a scorching fire. A perverse person stirs up conflict, and a gossip separates close friends. Right? Notice how the mouth is described as a fire. In ancient times, fires were feared because, well, they didn't have fire trucks that could go and spray water on them. Right? Like if a fire started, it was unquenchable. Right? Not unquenchable as in it'll burn forever, but unquenchable as that house is going to be destroyed completely. And there's something to be said about the way that we speak destroying things. Your words have the power to lead people to Christ, or they have the power to send them into the place of idolatry and judgment. Those who choose to be teachers have the opportunity to shape and direct a church that leads them to Christ, or they could stand on their own soapbox and they could preach the messages that they want to preach and lead that church into destruction. The shows, the things that you choose to follow, they could lead you into safety, or they could lead you into destruction. I have a third point, and that's that the tongue shows our double-mindedness. The tongue shows our double-mindedness. And James is he's talking about the fact that he's talking about this idea that you can say you love God, and then 10 minutes later you can say something that shows that it wasn't true. It's double-minded. In verse 9 he says this, he says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Does that sound like you guys here? It sounds like me. I'm over here like singing songs of praise, and I might leave here and start talking gossip about somebody else. That sounds like me. Like, I just got to be honest, right? He says this, he says, out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can fig tree bear olives or grapevine bear figs? Neither can salt springs produce fresh water. And I think James would also say, neither should those who claim to be Christ or claim a Christian, who claim to practice a pure religion, neither should they be using their tongue to curse people. Right? What we say matters. It really has severe consequences. And it's usually out of our heart that the mouth speaks. And so, that question I asked at the beginning of the service about, if you got paid $10 for every kind thing you said and $5 for every unkind thing you said, would you be rich or poor? I think we should think, because, a religion that does not keep a tight rein on its tongue is worthless. That's what James says. So there's something that we should all consider, and that's that we represent Christ with our actions, taking care of widows and orphans, not showing favoritism, and clothing the people who are without clothes, and giving food to the hungry. There's something about pure religion that is very active. But pure and true religion also involves what you say and how you represent Christ. And how you represent Christ matters, because you might just be a small person, but you have a large impact. We need to be people that represent Christ well. And that's my challenge to you today.